This special edition of the Open Soul Podcast was produced by students who participated in our podcast guest training program in October 2024. I'm Michael Riley, host of the Open Soul Podcast. Most of the people whose voices you're hearing today on this special episode had little to no experience doing podcast interviews less than a month before we did these recordings. The in-person training we offer prepares you to become an interesting and engaging guest on any podcast, where you'll be able to inform, entertain, and self-promote after just a few sessions. If you'd like to find out how you can attend one of our podcast guest workshops in the Phoenix area, please contact us by email at opensoulpodcast@gmail.com.
You're listening to the Open Soul Podcast.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. This is Naz, and welcome to our next segment of our very special edition of Open Soul Podcast. Now, today I'm joined by Annette Pedersen. Annette is a talented astrologer as well as an animal naturopathist. Annette, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm wonderful. I'm great. Happy to be here.
I'm glad. Now, I'm eager to dive into your work and what you do, but first I'd like to ask you a little bit about yourself. Where do you live? What makes your heart happy? Are you a coffee drinker or a tea drinker? The people got to know.
I'm definitely a coffee drinker, and I live at home.
That's great.
No, actually, I live in Glendale.
Okay.
Which is pretty close to here. It's not
Wonderful.
a long drive.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Okay. So tell me, let's first talk about astrology. Can you just give the people a brief background on what it means to be an astrologer and what astrology is, the fundamentals of it?
Definitely. Astrology actually is the study of cycles and patterns within a person's life. So you were born at a specific time, in a specific place, on a specific day, and that's what shows up in your natal chart. So we're able to determine personality traits. There's even astrology that does financial and medical aspects, which is fascinating.
And is that all based on like how the stars are aligned, or how is kind of like the science behind how you're able to get that information? Good
question. A lot of astronomers say, oh, it's fake, it doesn't make any sense, right? Because we're not following the constellations. But that's not what astrology is. We are actually doing the study of the seasons. And the cardinal signs, where the chart actually starts, is based on the equinoxes and the solstices of the year.
Okay.
And then people go, well, there are only 12 signs, so there can't be only 12 kinds of people. And they're absolutely right. There are 12 signs. There are 9 planets, mainly, that we work with. So right there, you have those combinations. Plus, we have the 12 houses. So we have those combinations. In the signs, there are 30 degrees per sign, so we have nuances there.
Okay.
So, yeah, you can come up with a ton of combinations for people.
So you can get really deep, really complex.
Yes.
Okay.
And also, it's how people see things. Everybody has their own personal lens for things. I can say the color blue, and someone might think of the ocean. Someone else might think of the sky.
Right.
And even if they think of the sky, is it the morning sky, the evening sky?
Okay. So are you saying then that it can be interpreted differently based on the astrologer?
Definitely.
Okay.
Most definitely.
Okay. Wonderful. So then what is something that you would say you do differently from your average astrologer when it comes to reading natal charts?
I find that my clients usually walk away with a sense of permission to be themselves instead of trying to fit in this little box that they thought they should be.
Right.
I've had people actually cry in relief, which is just, it's amazing to me. What a gift for me that was, to be able to help someone in that way.
Absolutely. And when did you discover this gift? When did you first become interested in astrology?
It happened in 2014 when I was working as a virtual assistant for someone who was giving classes on Priestess, which is basically how to master your own energy.
Okay.
And there was astrology involved. It was alchemical astrology. And I experienced that relief because before I was introduced to it, I really thought that I was either schizophrenic or had a dual personality. And then when I discovered just the basics of my own natal chart, I realized, oh my goodness, I'm not a misfit.
Right.
Right? I've just had a misunderstanding of myself.
Okay. Yeah, I love that.
Mm-hmm.
So, have you always been interested in metaphysics and spirituality, and how did that align for you whenever you first discovered astrology and when you discovered that you weren't a misfit after all?
I've always been spiritually leaning that way. Not so much in childhood because my family was practicing Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
So right now I'm a recovering Catholic.
Sure.
But my father was also very interested in the science of pyramids, and he did a lot of work with preserving things in a pyramid that he had built himself. It was very small.
Wow.
And then he started doing some sort of candle magic. And then the big secret came out that my aunt was a practicing astrologer, and she was very, very good at it.
Oh, so it runs in the family.
It does.
Okay.
It does. But then I decided that I needed to live in the real world, and I kind of put that aside.
Mm-hmm.
But it kept coming back and coming back and coming back.
Right.
And finally I said, okay, I give up. Let's go this route and stick to it.
Sure. So, knowing now that you kind of have some familial roots with astrology, do you consider your aunt to be somewhat of a role model for you when it comes to discovering that career field?
Sadly, no, because I never really knew her.
Okay.
But knowing that she did practice and was respected
Right.
makes sense to me.
Right. Absolutely. Do you have any role models or any figures when it comes to your work that you kind of take some pages out of their books?
Definitely my teachers,
Sure.
the ones that I go to. One has been practicing for 50 years,
Wow.
and he says he's still learning. He still learns something new every day, and that really appeals to me. You know, if you can do something for 50 years and help people and have fun doing it, and then you're still learning, it never gets old.
So, where did you grow up, and how did that affect your interest in the metaphysical?
I grew up in Pennsylvania. There was a suburbs northeast of Philadelphia. And I have a feeling that we had either built the house on some sort of sacred grounds because there were definitely entities in that house. Right? And I think that was one of the reasons why I kind of turned off to spirituality, because they weren't really friendly entities.
Sure,
right?
sure.
I didn't want to know about them.
I'd love for you to dive in a little bit more about that.
Ah, okay. There was something going on in the ground floor. I would not go in there after dark whatsoever. Just an absolute feeling of terror. Later on, after I grew up, and came out of childhood, I was like, well, that's silly, but I still couldn't go in there. I had to take an animal with me
Right.
in order to feel safe. And then I found out later that my younger brother, who was younger by 8 years, also had the same experience with the fear in there.
Wow.
So, yeah, it was pretty strong.
And so you said that having an animal as kind of a guardian or a protector that helped you out, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So you have an affinity for animals then.
Oh, definitely.
I love that. I
all
love
my
that.
life.
And
Yeah.
that definitely ties into the animal naturopathy. And I'd love to ask you a little bit more about that. But first, I'd like to ask you just a little bit more about your astrology and your field in astrology. I'd like to ask, what would a session look like for a client who's looking to pursue a booking with you?
It would be a conversation. Normally, people come with a specific question, and we certainly address that. But I would also go into a conversation with them about points in their chart that I can see that jump out at me, because that's usually the best way for me to go,
Sure.
my best readings. And instead of saying, oh, this means that and that means this, I would ask, how is this showing up for you? Right? Are you having problems with this? Is this working really well for you? And if they were having problems, we would then look for some sort of remedy or mitigation for the problem.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you, Annette.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'd like to take the next few moments to talk about your skills in animal naturopathy. Now, that's not something that I've been familiar with. That's actually something that you introduced me to. I'd love for you to tell the people a little bit more about what that is.
It's a holistic way of looking at an animal's life and their health. Oh, a lot of veterinarians, bless their hearts, they don't get into the field for money or for fame. They want to help the animals.
Right.
But a lot of times it's through an allopathic remedy that's going to address the symptoms, where naturopathy and holistic health is actually starting from the beginning and getting healthy, allowing the body to do its own healing, and giving it that kind of environment where it can thrive.
That's incredible. Now, having known now that you have experience in animal naturopathy and also being able to kind of compare it to what you've seen in some veterinary practices, can you kind of compare and contrast what you might see from an animal that's looking for treatment from both sides?
If the animal is experiencing some sort of disease or malaise, I would want to work with the veterinarian because they definitely have remedies, that obviously work.
Right.
But we also want to support the animal and the animal's system, their diet, their exercise, and actually their mental health also. And we also want to look at the pet's human or the pet's human family to see what's going on there emotionally, because that also affects the pet's health.
Okay. And what is something that you would say is like a big misconception when it comes to animal health in general that you've seen in your studies?
Oh, pretty much what we see in the medical field overall, even for humans. If you take this pill, everything will be okay. Well, it may be okay for the moment, but it's usually just a Band-Aid, and we're not getting to the root of the problem, so that we don't have the problem anymore.
Right. That's incredible. And for those that are looking for more information, I know that you are here at the Place of Spiritual Wisdom. You teach a few classes.
I do.
What are those classes that you teach?
I teach astrology, various forms of astrology from very, very beginner to the intermediate. And I'm also beginning to teach animal communication.
Animal communication. I love it. And that ties into animal naturopathy, right?
It certainly does. Yes.
Absolutely, because it's a powerful skill to be able to possess, to be able to communicate with animals, which are a largely nonverbal species, right? So
Exactly.
Yeah. What would something like that look like for a student who's looking to pursue? What do you think that they, what's something that they can take away from that?
With the animal communication?
Yes.
It would be doing a bit of an exercise to calm down and not have expectations of what's going to happen. And then we do a couple of experiments on different animals. In other words, we'd have a picture of one animal and see what everybody was getting and then compare notes. It's amazing how close those notes are to each other.
Right.
And then sending a message to your companion animal in a way that you will know whether they heard you or not when you get home.
Okay. That's incredible. And that it has been such a pleasure to talk to you. Now, before we wrap, I would just like to, I'd like you to share with the people, what is some ways that you can, what's some ways that people can get in touch with you if they're looking to learn a little bit more about you, if they're looking to book with you, if they're looking to pursue a class with you?
Thank you. Yes, I will have cards at the Place of Spiritual Wisdom where they can contact me there.
Perfect. And do you have any parting messages, any words of wisdom that you'd like to share?
I think getting to know yourself and having permission to be who you truly are is one of the greatest gifts anybody can have.
Beautiful. I love that. Annette, thank you so much for your time. This has been an extraordinary pleasure. I'd like to thank our listeners for tuning in to this next segment of our special edition of the Open Soul Podcast. And Annette, take care. I wish you well.
Thank you.
You're listening to the Open Soul Podcast.